Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I hope you're enjoying the season as we move closer and closer to Christmas. And I do hope that everybody had a lovely Thanksgiving last week. I forgot to mention that, so I do hope everybody had a good time. So let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. And of course, it's very, very traumatic because Jack has just had his dog, a beautiful golden retriever called Lassie, abducted from him in broad daylight by a man who just threw Lassie into the back of a red SUV and drove away. So let's continue with our story. Lassie had been given to me as a birthday present 2 years earlier, on my 12th birthday to be precise. I'd been begging both of my parents for a golden retriever since I was all but 6 years old, for I'd fallen hopelessly in love with our neighbour's golden retriever called Gunner, who had the most affectionate disposition I'd ever seen in a dog before, and would cover my face with all kinds of sloppy kisses. From that point on, I knew that I knew, unlike anything else I've known as assertively in my life before, that I just had to have a golden retriever, as in my impressionable young opinion, no other breed would do. Every year my parents would ask what it was that I wanted for Christmas, or for a birthday that was hiding its head around the very next corner, and my answer unequivocally was always the same. I resolutely wanted a dog that looked exactly the same as Gunner, a golden retriever, of course. I think my parents thought I'd grow out of my obsessive fixation on golden retrievers, and would later in my young life be asking for other gifts that boys my age would likely be requesting. But they were proved wrong in all their assumptions. It would seem as each year went by, my wishes remained resolutely the same. I wanted a female golden retriever that I was going to call Lassie after the movie I revered so much. I would look at my parents with wide, pleading eyes and beg them with all my heart to buy me a golden retriever. My mother's answer was always the same. "We'll see about it, Jack," she would say. My heart would drop like a stone being flung into a lake, for in my mother's vocabulary, "we will see" only meant one thing, and that was it wasn't going to happen. But did I stop pleading? Absolutely not. My teacher, Mrs. Wingchair at school, told us all the time that if we wanted something badly enough, to never ever give up. I had followed her salient advice to the letter, closing my eyes as I prayed every single night before I went to bed, and I asked God for a golden retriever. My parents argued among themselves about my desire to own a golden retriever. My mother was dead set against my getting a golden retriever. It didn't help that my mother's sister Gertie was dead set against the idea, and could sometimes be a powerful influencer and shaker in my mother's life, I regret to say. "Goodness gracious, dear," she would say to my mother, "you don't want a dog like that. Goodness gracious, I couldn't think of anything worse. Imagine how filthy your house will become. Besides, your house is so dreadfully small. You hardly have enough space in here to swing a cat. Do you really want your house smelling like a dirty dog blanket?" My mother told me she didn't mind us getting a small dog, perhaps, but golden retrievers were large. "They take up a lot of space, Jack," she would say. "Besides, Gertie's absolutely right. I would hardly describe our yard, or our house for that matter, as large enough to accommodate a large dog. Besides anything else, they always require regular walking, don't they? They're expensive to feed." And the list of negatives went on and on. I knew, of course, that Gertie's negative propaganda, which was rather like fake news, was masterfully all behind my mother's apparent disapproval of acquiring a golden retriever. And it seems Gertie's negative influences ran deep. I think my mother thought she had persuaded my father that getting a large dog was absolutely out of the question, but my father had other ideas on his mind. I think there was a large part of him that wanted to give the finger up to my mother's sister Gertie, who my father secretly could not stand. My father even confessed that he'd also been very taken by the neighbour's dog Gunner, and had been rather partial to the idea of our family getting a golden retriever, as he believed every kid should grow up with animals in their home. But my mother had never taken his seemingly idle comments all that seriously. My father artfully changed the dynamics of things around our house, when against my mother's wishes on my 12th birthday, he came home from work with a big box in his hands, accompanied by a huge mischievous grin on his face that he couldn't seem to wipe away. I guess my mother sensed by my father's rather peculiar expression on his face that he was up to something, for she raised a brow and looked at him rather quizzically. I, on the other hand, was blindly immune to what was going on around me. I was so caught up in the bubble of my own personal melancholia that I could not shake off. It had been another dreadfully disappointing birthday for me, with my wish for a golden retriever still not fully realized. I was left with the grim, soul-destroying realization that I was likely never going to acquire the dog of my dreams. I knew my mother's dogged determination not to have a large dog around the house, due to Gertie's artful persuasions, was the quintessential reason why my dreams would probably never come true. I secretly resented my mother bitterly for this, and it didn't help that Gertie kept going on and on about how filthy dogs were, and getting me one was a very bad idea. She had certainly filled my mother's head with all kinds of alarming reasons why one should never own a dog under any circumstances. I assumed the big cardboard box my father had placed on the counter contained the ice cream cake my parents always ordered for my birthday, with regularity. This year I had chosen a golden retriever ice cream cake, taken from a picture of Gunner, which my mother had dutifully ordered, persuading the people to try and make the cake look like the dog. "I got your ice cream cake, son," said my father with a big sparkling twinkle in his eye. "I have to say they did a fine job on making the cake for you. It does remind me of Gunner. It's extraordinarily similar to the photograph you gave us, son. You're really going to approve of this one." My father's humour did not impress me at all. How could a cake ever compare with the real deal? My parents had not got me a golden retriever for my birthday, and I'm sorry, but a lousy cake that looked like a golden retriever would never substitute for the real thing. I had so longed in all my heart to have a golden retriever, and now I had reached breaking point, as such was the bitterness of my disappointment. "Go on, son. Aren't you going to take a look at your cake?" my father encouraged me. I reluctantly walked over to the box. Of course I liked ice cream as much as the next kid did, and I looked forward to ice cream cake every birthday. But for some reason, I was feeling so deflated, so cheated, so discouraged, so bitterly disappointed, because I was certain that my father was going to get me a golden retriever for my 12th birthday, for he had hinted as much to me when my mother was out of the line of his hearing. But everything had fallen flat on my birthday, as after I'd opened all my presents that morning, I knew that I was not going to get a golden retriever. I reluctantly walked over to the box that was supposed to contain my ice cream cake, and I looked inside. I nearly fainted with shock, as inside the box was the most gorgeous little fluffy puppy, with big brown eyes and a pink ribbon on its collar. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Could this even be real? I lovingly picked up the golden retriever puppy, holding her close to my chest. I could feel her little heart beating. She was so cuddly and smelt of parsley, that particular puppy breath that I love so much. I knew my life would never be the same again, for this little addition to our home had all but stolen my heart. I knew that in the 2 seconds that I held her in my arms, and that was the moment that was one of the happiest in my young life. "Dad! I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. You actually did it. You actually got me a golden retriever puppy. I don't know what to say, Dad. This is the most beautiful dog I've ever seen in my whole life. Dad, I don't know what to say. I've never had a more wonderful present. She's the best. I'm going to call her Lassie." "Well, I would hope you were going to call her Lassie. You've been saying so for long enough, son." "I knew you would be rather partial to your cake this year," he teased. "What on earth have you done, darling?" my mother asked my father, as she watched me pull out the little blonde bundle of fluff. Even her stubbornly dog-resistant heart melted like butter when she laid eyes on Lassie for the first time. Indeed, she took over and cuddled the puppy to her chest holding it close to her, and she was saying all kinds of things like, "Oh, isn't she absolutely adorable? Oh, my word! Look at that cute little tail. It's wagging all the time. She's such a little happy thing, isn't she? What a delightful nature. Oh, and I do love her dark eyes. They're so soulful, are they not?" I hasten to say, my mother was in love with Lassie. It couldn't have got better than that. And all her retorts about us getting a golden retriever just whittled away, for she was as smitten about the dog as I was. "I thought we agreed we weren't going to get a large dog, and especially not a golden retriever," she said to my father, but her voice was not remotely reprimanding, for her face had broken out into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and from that moment I knew I would be able to keep Lassie for good, and we soon became inseparable. I was so eager to return home from school every day. I couldn't wait for the school bus to drop me at the corner, and I would literally run back home. Lassie would be waiting for me very enthusiastically. She always seemed to know when I was coming back home. I'd see her head peering at me through the hallway window, and then she would charge over to the front door, her tail wagging furiously, and she would yap excitedly. And once I entered the house, she'd be all over me, giving me the welcome of note, and covering me with affectionate soppy kisses. She unequivocally knew she was my own dog, although she faithfully loved and adored every single member of my family. Now she was gone from our lives, like the most perfectly beautiful shooting star you ever saw, that was there one moment, gone the next. I stared up at the road in bemusement, unable to believe what had happened. Tears streamed down my cheeks unabashedly. I began to uncontrollably sob, and I'd never cried like this before. I was blinded by my tears as I ran towards my home, barely being able to see where I was going, because my eyesight had become blurred. My heart was so broken by an insurmountable grief. Mrs. Trellis stopped me in my tracks along the path, looking at me with such pity in her eyes, and then I threw myself into her loving arms and began to sob into her chest. She patted my back gently. "There you go. Have a good old cry, Jack. It's very good for you to cry. Let it all out. You better come inside, my dear. I'll give you something sweet to drink. You've had the most dreadful shock. I'm so sorry, Jack. I don't know what to say. What an awful thing to happen to you." Mrs. Trellis kindly led me into her kitchen and gave me a sweet drink to calm my nerves. "I saw the whole thing, Jack," she explained to me. "The man in the red Hyundai. He came out from nowhere, didn't he? I thought there must be something wrong with his car's tyres. I saw he'd recruited you to investigate them for him. And the next thing I know, the man grabs poor Lassie, pops him into his car and whizzes away with your beautiful dog. I mean, who does that? He must be completely sick in the head. We must go and file a police report as soon as we can. It's such a damn pity I wasn't wearing my glasses at the time, because I couldn't read the man's number plates." As you can imagine, losing Lassie was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to me in my young life. I couldn't believe anyone could be that cruel as to abduct my dog in broad daylight like that, and to trick me into helping them to look at their tyre, while all the time they had ulterior motives. I was confounded, as were many people in our local neighbourhood, that such a dreadful thing could happen in such a peaceful little suburb like ours. Many people were extremely worried that their four-legged friends might also be abducted, so everyone became guarded, and for a while visits to the doggy park decreased. My parents watched me spiral into a very deep depression. My father even offered to buy me another golden retriever to replace Lassie, but I didn't want just another dog. I only wanted Lassie. I remember he sat on my bed one evening. He avoided any eye contact with me, because he could see I was so sorrowful, and very diplomatically he said to me, "Son, I'm very sorry about what has happened. To Lassie, I mean. No one deserves this, especially not you. You were devoted to that dog, and had wanted a golden retriever for years and years. Sometimes, son, bad things happen to good people. I don't know what to say. There are no words, are there?" "But why can't the police find her?" I cried out indignantly. "We filed a report, didn't we? I gave them a description of the driver. I told them what he looked like." "Son, you didn't get the man's license plates, did you? The man you and Mrs. Trellis described to the police could fit the profile of many Americans. He could be anyone, and is probably long gone by now. He might not even live in this state." My father looked rather uncomfortable for a moment, shifting awkwardly on the bed. "Look, son, I don't know how to say this to you. Your mother's tried to discourage me from having this conversation with you, but I just feel I need to say this. I know this is not what you want to hear, but I just don't think Lassie will ever be coming back any time soon. I know you've been grieving her loss, but it's unlikely you will ever see her again. So how about I buy you another golden retriever puppy? I know it won't be the same as Lassie, but I'm sure you will grow to love her as much, maybe even more so." "Don't you get it, Dad? I could never love another dog more than Lassie. I don't want any other dog. I only want Lassie." "I know, son. This is very difficult for us all, not just for you. We all miss Lassie very, very much. There is no doubt that Lassie was a remarkable and very fine dog. Wherever she is, I'm sure she's been taken very good care of. And she's a very easy dog to love. I'm sure she will have a good life, so you mustn't worry about her." "But why?" I said, my eyes flooding with tears. "Why would someone steal my dog, Daddy? Why? I don't understand." "Because, son, there are some seriously sick people in the world. And let's not kid, Lassie was young and a fine-looking golden retriever. That's probably why she was taken. Golden retrievers are expensive dogs and highly sought after. I just want you to think over what I've said, son. Me and your mum are very worried about you. I've never seen you so despondent before. Mrs. Smith, your English teacher at school, contacted your mother the other day to say that you stare out of the school window all day long, and you look so desperately sorrowful. Everyone is extremely worried about you, son. I really think you should consider my offer to get you another puppy. I contacted the breeder. She has a golden retriever who is one of Lassie's sisters, who's expecting puppies. Think about it, son," said my father, walking towards the door and closing it slowly behind him. The very idea of getting another puppy to replace Lassie was unbearable for me. That evening I cried long into the night into my pillow. I worried so much about where Lassie was, what had become of her, whether she was happy or not. I couldn't bear to think of her being abused, or feeling as if I'd abandoned her. All I could do was pray in earnest that God would bring Lassie home to me, for my whole world had lost its purpose without my dog being around. And after my prayer, an extraordinary peace came over me, and for some unfathomable reason, I really got a sense that this wasn't the last time I'd see Lassie. Gertie MacDouglas was not entirely happy. She was punctilious about how she liked things to be done, and that foolish man Marvin had let her down yet again. What was he thinking, abducting Lassie while driving his red Hyundai, with all the plates visibly on display for anyone to see? What if his number plate had been taken down by a snoopy neighbour, so that all the dots would finally lead straight to her, and she couldn't allow that to happen? She'd received a phone call from the annoying, incompetent man, telling her in a very sombre tone of voice, "It's done." "Well, I should think it's done. I can't believe it, Marvin. You've taken long enough. I'm glad to finally hear it. I thought you were backtracking on me for a moment." "That's because your so-called substitute grandson, or whatever you like to call him, didn't take the dog for a walk all day. I thought you said he'd take the dog for a walk at lunchtime, but that didn't happen. I waited and waited, and finally in the late afternoon I saw him. I almost gave up. Do you have any idea how hot it was in that car of mine? It was sweltering. I felt like I was in a sauna. Anyway, I intercepted him on the road. I got the bloody dog. It keeps whining all the time. Just so you know, Gertie, I didn't enjoy doing this one bit. It was awful taking that boy's dog from him. I felt cruel doing such a thing. He seemed like a sweet kid. He must be devastated to lose his four-legged friend. I feel like a prize jerk doing this. I can't think what you've got against the young man. It's none of your business, Marvin. I have my reasons for doing this. But I hope you didn't make a spectacle of yourself or draw any unnecessary or unwanted attention to your car. People would likely notice a red Hyundai loitering around the neighbourhood for a very long period of time. It might have looked rather suspicious. It's so typical of you, Marvin, not to be very astute. You do things so sloppily. I wouldn't be surprised if the police were hot on your trail. And if they are, just so you know, I had nothing to do with this. This was all your idea. As far as they're concerned, I don't even know who you are. So is that how you're going to play it, Gertie? If the police are on to me, you're going to pretend you don't know who I am? Well, pretty much. I'll just say you're my next-door neighbour, and I know nothing about you at all. That's rich coming from you. Anyway, everything went smoothly. So relax, Gertie. It was quiet in the neighbourhood, but I resent you calling me sloppy. I am anything but I'll have you know, I will not appreciate you messing me around any more. This chapter, as far as I'm concerned, is finally closed. We had a deal, and I've stuck to my side of the bargain. Now you stick to yours, and don't you dare go blackmailing me again, because I'm not going to tolerate it next time. Blackmail? What on earth are you talking about, Marvin? Where did you get such a dreadful idea from? You were doing me a favour in return for my silence. A deal is a deal, is it not? One good turn for another, so to speak. Two neighbours looking out for each other. I think threatening to tell my wife Vanessa that I've been having an affair is blackmail, especially when you know it's not true, Gertie. I bumped into an ex-girlfriend of mine. She threw her arms around me. But the photographs you sneakily took with your cell phone look incriminating, because I kissed her. Yes, I admit I kissed her, but it meant nothing. I only agreed to do this damn thing for you, because I don't want to lose Vanessa over this. And I know how cunningly you can twist things to fit your own duplicitous agenda, Gertie. I've met people like you before, but I never thought I'd end up living next door to someone as insidious as you. Just so you know, I didn't feel remotely good about abducting the young boy's dog. It was an awful thing to do. If Vanessa knew about this, she'd be devastated. She'd be appalled by what I'd done. I'm appalled by what I've done. I feel sick to my stomach about it. And let me tell you, the dog has not stopped whining for a second. He hates being parted from his friend. Oh, don't worry about that dreadful bag of fleas. She'll do just fine. Dogs are very resilient, you know. They bounce back pretty quickly, don't they? They adapt to a new environment easily. I don't think that's true in these circumstances. This poor female dog looks miserable to me. I can't imagine what her owner must feel like right now. I feel lousy doing a thing like this. If Vanessa knew anything about this, well, I can't imagine how she would react. Never mind about your wife, Marvin. Providing you play your cards right, she'll never know about any of this. Are you threatening me, Gertie? But of course not, Marvin. Where on earth did you get that absurd idea from? For the record, I think you could have done things a lot less cack-handedly, if you don't mind my saying so. I did rather expect better of you. At the very least, you should have put up fake number plates on your red Hyundai, or at least covered them up with a lot of mud so no one could read the numbers. But then again, you weren't terribly bright in that regard. What if someone had read your number plates? I just am very concerned about this getting back to me. And if it does, I know nothing about you. I hope you appreciate that. Are we going to go around and around in circles, Gertie, talking about the same thing again and again? about how completely cack-handed and useless I am? Relax, woman. No one read my number plate. So keep your hair on, will you? I'm not a complete imbecile, I'll have you know. I had to think fast, didn't I, when I saw the boy walking down the street? I wasn't expecting to see him. I was about to drive away. And then he appeared out of nowhere. I recognized him and his dog immediately from the photograph you gave me. I had to act quickly. Well, what are you going to do with the dog, Marvin? I don't want it ever finding its way back home again. Is that understood? You must find a brand new home for the dog. Put her up for adoption. I'm relying on you to do this. I'm surprised you even care about the dog. Of course I care about the dog. I'm not completely heartless, you know. What are you going to do with it? I'll make a plan, said Marvin. Don't worry about it. I'll find a good home for her. These kind of dogs are in high demand. See to it that you do. I want none of this coming back to haunt me. Do you understand, Marvin? Because if it does, it'll all be on you. Gertie, why did you insist I did this in the first place? Why do you want to punish this poor young kid who owns the dog? He seemed like a sweet child to me. What have you got against him? I've got nothing against young Jack, snapped Gertie. If you must know, it's the damned dog. I can't stand the sight of her. I know the family would never get rid of the dreadful bugger if I didn't intercede. I've done the family a big favour, only they won't realise it because people like that can be so damn short-sighted and stupid. But in time they'll realise that they're much better off without having a dog around. There was a pause at the end of the line. But what if they get another dog to replace the one they've lost? I'm not going to do this again, Gertie, for you. Do you understand? There is no way I'm ever going to abduct another dog. You get it? I've done this once, and I will not be doing it again. I get it, Marvin. You won't be needing to do this again. Don't worry about that. I'll make absolutely sure the Strattons don't get another dog. But when Gertie ended the phone call, her heart began to flip-flop. Damn, why hadn't she thought about that before? She knew how pathetically besotted that Jack had been over Lassie. What if his parents decided to replace the dog for him and get him another big blonde flea ball? How would she get rid of yet another dog without it looking very suspicious? She didn't want the Stratton family to ever know that she was the one responsible for Lassie's abduction. If the Strattons learnt the bitter truth of her involvement in the dog's abduction, they might never want to speak to her again, and she couldn't allow that to happen. Gertie had successfully managed to blackmail her next-door neighbour, Marvin Thomas. She had always known how useless and pathetically weak he was as a man. It was a stroke of good fortune that she had been enjoying a coffee at the Pecan Maple Cafe in town, when who should come charging through the door but Marvin Thomas himself. A young, pretty woman in the cafe, who appeared to be waiting for him rather patiently, had thrown her arms around him, and for a brief moment they had kissed, locking lips together, until Marvin had stepped back, apologizing profusely by saying, "I shouldn't have done that. I'm a married man. I don't know what came over me. I must apologize." "It was my fault," the woman replied. "I got carried away. I was the one that encouraged you. It's so good to see you. I really need your advice, Marvin, about something that's really important. That's why I called you. Thank you for coming." Gertie had eavesdropped on the conversation between Marvin and this mysterious woman. She had surreptitiously taken some snapshots of the two of them together, involved in that kiss. She knew she would take the photograph to show Vanessa, her next-door neighbour, so that she could see what her husband was getting up to behind her back. If Vanessa were to see the incriminating evidence that Gertie had on her cell phone, she would ultimately kick her husband out of her house for good, and Gertie wanted to see that happen, for she had never liked Marvin terribly much, and she very much disapproved of the fact that he mowed the lawn every Saturday with his shirt off, because it lowered the whole tone of the neighbourhood. It also made it look as if she was living next door to a man who couldn't afford to buy himself a decent shirt, or couldn't be bothered to put on one, because he was just far too sloppy. It was in that moment Gertie realised that she could get Marvin to do her bidding, and use the photographs as a perfect form of blackmail. She had promptly called him over to the house, in the pretence she needed him to help her hang up a picture that she had purchased from the local fair. Marvin had been quite affronted when Gertie had presented him with the photographic evidence of him kissing another woman. She told him she had copies of the photograph, so if he smashed up her cell phone, it would be a pretty much useless endeavour. She had him between the short and curlies, and she knew it. So did he.
"It's not what you think, Gertie," he protested. "That's a photograph of my ex-girlfriend, Sasha Jones. We met up in the coffee shop, that's all. She wanted some advice from me. It was perfectly innocent, I can assure you. You know me, Gertie. I would never cheat on Vanessa. She's the quintessential love of my life. You're not going to tell her about this. Please, for God's sake, don't. I'm begging you. It would break her heart."
"If you say your so-called rendezvous with this ex-girlfriend of yours, Sasha Jones, was so perfectly innocent as you claim, why are you kissing her so passionately in this photograph? Everybody in the coffee shop was witness to this. It was very inappropriate, if you don't mind my saying so. I wonder what Vanessa would say about this photograph. I can't imagine she would be best pleased to see it. Can you?"
"Why are you doing this, Gertie? Why are you confronting me with this photograph? I can't understand why you're doing this." "You don't understand," Marvin protested. "The kiss was a mistake. It was fleeting. It happened very quickly. I guess we got caught up in the moment. Sasha and I, we go back a long way. We have a long history between us. It was nostalgic meeting up with her again after all this time. In that moment, we got carried away for a second, but we both realised it was a mistake. I met up with her because she wanted advice. That's all it was. Please, Gertie, I'm begging you, don't tell Vanessa about any of this. If she were to see this photograph, she'd believe the worst of me. She'd file for a divorce, God forbid. You know what Vanessa's like. If she thinks I cheated on her, she'll throw me out with a dirty bathwater. There are no second chances with someone like Vanessa. Look, Marvin, I won't show Vanessa this photograph, but on one condition only."
Marvin's face paled. His eyes grew round.
"What is it you want me to do for you, Gertie?" he asked, almost grovelling.
Gertie hid the happy smile behind her straight lips. Good, she thought to herself. Marvin was as malleable as a piece of clay. He'd do anything to protect his relationship with Vanessa, so now was her time to go in for the kill. "I need a small favour, Marvin, from you. In return for my silence, that is."
"What kind of favour are you asking of me, Gertie? Why don't I like the sound of this? You don't want me to kill someone for you, do you?"
Absolutely not. As if. I'd never ask something like that of you. No, this is completely different. I just want you to abduct a golden retriever for me called Lassie. I'll give you the details concerning the dog. It belongs to a family member of mine, a young boy, 14-year-old boy called Jack Stratton. The dog gets walked every day by Jack, usually after he returns home from school. So you can keep out a watchful eye on the dog. And at the first opportunity, I want you to grab the female golden retriever and whisk her away. You need to abduct her and find a new home for her. But I want you to be clever about how you go about this. The boy must not know I am behind this abduction under any circumstances. Is that understood? If you do exactly as I say, your secret will remain safe with me. You have my word on this."
"But I can't do that, Gertie. Are you insane? You're asking me to steal a young boy's pet. That's an awful thing to do. I can't imagine how the boy will feel if I take his dog away from him."
"That is exactly what I'm asking of you, Marvin. Nothing less and nothing more. It's very simple, very straightforward, and easy enough for you to do."
"But I can't do that, Gertie. That's disgusting. As I keep saying to you, the kid probably loves that dog. It's cruel to do a thing like that." Well, if you can't do as I say, Marvin, then I'm very sorry, but I can't keep your secret, and I won't. I wonder what Vanessa will think when she sees these incriminating photographs of you surreptitiously meeting up with your ex-girlfriend. I think the photograph of you kissing her so passionately speaks 1,000 words, don't you? It was a very passionate kiss as far as I was concerned. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was just a little peck. You can't do this, Gertie. You can't do this to me. It's not fair. It's not right. I think you will find that I can, Marvin, Gertie had said very smugly, with a very satisfied-looking smirk written all over her face. All right, I'll do it then. But just so you know, Gertie, I'm not happy about this. Not happy about this at all. But I'd do anything to save my marriage. I rather thought you'd say that. You're very sensible, Marvin. That's a very wise thing for you to do. I'll give you all the details in regards to the dog, and I want you to abduct her as soon as possible. As Gertie had expected, Marvin had buckled like putty in her hands, just as she thought he would. He was so pathetic. But he'd been useful for her purposes. At long last she'd finally got him to abduct Lassie. Stupid, stupid man, she mumbled angrily under her breath. He's so nearly messed up. But at least the deed has been done as far as I'm concerned. And now I never have to attend another Friday night dinner at the Stratton's house and watch that dreadful dirtball of a dog slobbering around the place and covering my clothes with her blonde hair. That Friday night, after Lassie's abduction, when Gertie had arrived for Friday night dinner at the Strattons, she had been met by a very glum household, all desperately upset because that flea bag was no longer around. The whole Stratton family were absolutely pathetic, she couldn't help but think. Something dreadful's happened, Gertie, Katie Stratton had informed her, gesturing for Gertie to come into the house. Gertie had pretended to be surprised. What has happened? She asked. Is everything all right? If you don't mind my saying, dear, but you look rather peaky. You're not feeling poorly, are you, by any chance? It's Jack's dog. Someone's abducted him in broad daylight, would you believe, on our street this afternoon. What is the world coming to when someone does an insane thing like that? As you can imagine, poor Jack is absolutely devastated. We all are. As let's just say Lassie was such a special, much-loved member of our family. No doubt the man who abducted her knew exactly what he was doing, and knew about how valuable her breed is. So is probably intent on selling her to someone for a substantial sum of money. It had been a struggle for Gertie to purse her lips and not to smile. I'm so sorry to hear that, dear. I don't think that Lassie would sell for very much. She's 2 years old already. But it is terrible news that she's been abducted. I always felt that you lived in such a safe area. But obviously I'm wrong about that. Jack had been standing in the doorway when Gertie entered the house. His red eyes were puffy from crying. He had said, I don't believe you're sorry for a second, are you, Gertie? You never liked Lassie, did you? You were always trying to run her down with your mouth. You're probably secretly pleased she's been abducted, so that your clothes don't get covered with all her blonde hairs. Katie had turned around and snapped at her son, her face growing pink with embarrassment. Oh, I'm so sorry, Gertie. You must excuse Jack for being so terribly rude. I know you're upset, Jack. We all are. It's a travesty that someone has taken Lassie. But there's no need to be rude to Gertie. Of course she's upset your dog has been abducted. Gertie wouldn't want you to lose your dog. I want you to apologize to Gertie for insinuating such an unkind thing. I'm not apologizing to someone who's glad my dog is gone. Never! I'm never apologizing. It had been difficult to enjoy Friday dinner with the Stratton household that evening. Gertie could see everyone was in very low spirits, and all visibly upset about the dog being abducted. What was wrong with the Strattons, she couldn't help but wonder. Could they not see how much better things were without that flea bag around?
The house felt so much quieter, so much more peaceful, without that dreadful dog running around the place, wagging its tail all the time, threatening to break anything its tail encountered. Now when she attended Friday night dinner with the Strattons, she wouldn't have to worry about getting her clothes covered in white hairs. Bertie hated dogs with a passion, and cats, as far as she was concerned, were almost as bad, but at least they weren't so slobbery. But all animals were filthy. She had done the Stratton family a favour. In time they would see how much better off their lives were without Lassie around. Gertie enjoyed spending Friday night dinner with the Stratton family. She considered herself to be the children's substitute grandmother, although it would seem that Jack had made it painfully obvious he didn't like her at all, because she didn't like dogs. But he was still a work in progress as far as she was concerned, and would finally come around in the end. She was sure of it. So there we are, that's the end of part 3. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good